Hello everyone, and welcome to part 3 of 5 of your Introduction to Legal Research. If you are watching this video, you should have already completed part 1, so you need to find something, and part 2, so you need to find a case, and are generally comfortable using our LibGuides and catalog, browsing the CAIJ's topo, and searching for case law in CanLII and CAIJ. Now we move on to part 3, so you need to find and interpret legislation. Legislative research can be very complicated, as there can be a lot of information and types of documents relevant for your research. That being said, given time constraints, in this module we will only be looking to find specific documents without looking at the legislative process generally. Specifically, we will look at statutes, we'll briefly look at regulations, and we'll learn how to find bills and debates. We will also look at annotated legislation. Other elements of legislative research will be looked at more closely in the winter semester. As per usual, after this video, you will be given an exercise to complete. The exercise will help you gauge how well you understand the material and are able to apply what we've covered. As a reminder, if you get stuck along the way, your TLs are available to guide you, and I am also available to meet with you virtually or in person. So just like last time, we'll start today's lesson off with a little preview of citations. Again, we'll do just the bare minimum to help you understand what you are looking at and where to find it. The idea still being that this will help with the research bit coming up. The goal here isn't for you to be able to cite to legislation properly. I'm not even going to explain all the details fully. Rather, what I want is for you to be able to recognize a citation to legislation, and maybe figure out additional details about the legislation so you know where to look for it. As a reminder, the McGill Law Journal will be offering a more complete citations training in the coming weeks. So let's say you're writing a paper on the life imprisonment sentence. You'll recall that we tried to find cases on this topic last module by doing a keyword search in CanLII. In a few minutes, I'll show you an easier way to find cases on this topic that does not involve keyword searching. First, though, let's assume that you know that the provision of the criminal code that deals with life imprisonment is section 745. Your paper will necessarily refer to this provision, so you want to cite to it properly in the paper. Here's how you would do it. The title of the legislation, where to find the official version. This includes the jurisdiction, so province or territory, or C in this case for Canada. The year, and I'm not going to go into why it shows 1985 here, even though you'll be looking at the most recent version, but just accept that this is the right citation. The chapter, C46, and the exact pinpoint to the section of the criminal code you are referring to, section 745. What you need to retain from this, when you see a citation that looks like this, with chapters, small c, and sections, that you're looking at a statute. The jurisdiction appears right after the title, and this is useful to know when you have multiple jurisdictions with a law that was given the same name, like the Motor Vehicle Act. The pinpoint, the exact reference point, is always at the end. So here you're looking at the Criminal Code, C is for Canada, RSC, Revised Statutes of Canada, and you want section 745. If you were referencing the entire Criminal Code, you would leave out the pinpoint. So let's try the next few. The title is in italics, Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms. Here Q is for Quebec, and usually the jurisdiction comes at the end, but of course Quebec is an exception. It's chapter C12 of the volume, and you're looking at section 10. So just a quick tip to confuse you a little more in your first few days of law school. In Quebec, we use the term article and not section when describing a codal provision. This goes for English and French, so article, article. But when it comes to any other legislation in Quebec, article in French gets translated as section in English. Though honestly, people here especially will say article in English when talking about Quebec laws generally, I find. So the next one, again, your title in italics, jurisdiction is O for Ontario, chapter C12, section 10.9. And the next, you have the title in italics, Y for Yukon, chapter 25, section 5.2. Evidently, these citations all refer to print books where you will find the legislation, but all of this is available online now, and the print citation just sticks with it. Last, this is special because it's a code, but you'll be seeing this more often than any other legislative citation, so it's useful to know and thankfully very easy to recognize. Article 1457 of the Civil Code of Quebec. Unlike other legislation, civil codes come after the article. Another type of legislative document you might want to obtain is a bill. A bill is a prospective statute that must go through a series of readings and votes before becoming law. In other words, it is not yet law, but a proposal. Bills may be new legislation or may amend or revise an existing act. Bills are extremely easy to recognize from their citation, as they literally contain the word bill as well as the title of the bill. They also clearly show the jurisdiction involved and year, making it easy to retrieve the document referenced. It is also easy to see whether the bill amends existing legislation or is new legislation. It is crucial to be able to find the text of a bill when working in law in order to stay on top of potential or imminent changes in the law. When doing legislative research, often you will be asked to interpret legislation. Sometimes you will be asked how the legislation has been interpreted by the courts, and in this case you will need to do some case law research or read an annotated law. Other times you will be asked what the legislature intended when it passed the law, and here you will often need to go into the debates. Of course, in both cases, you may find the answer in doctrine because someone has already shared the answer in a published text. We'll be looking at doctrine in the next module. Debates in committee documents are easy to recognize again by their citation, which makes reference to the jurisdiction, legislature, type of document, date, and where relevant, a speaker's name. Sometimes the title of the bill being debated is also included in a citation. And that citation relating to statutes, bills, and debates. As I mentioned, there are tons of other types of legislative and government documents, but that's for another time. Like I said, I just want you to be able to recognize what you're looking at, particularly for these three important types of documents. So, let's say you need to find legislation. Where will you start? Again, the answer here is not Google. Not because you won't end up finding what you're looking for, but again, you will have too much noise in the way. In particular, instead of finding the full text of the legislation itself, you'll get a lot of commentary on it. Once again, your instinct should be to head directly to the law subject guide to see what it suggests. Recall that when you click in, you have your key resources to the right. There aren't any descriptions here, but with time, you'll discover that most of them actually include legislation too. But let's say you really didn't know, and you're looking for Canadian legislation. You'd select Canadian law, and then you can either read through the key resources here or click into the Legislative Research tab. So these would be the most recommended databases for Canadian legislative research. Now let's say you're looking for Quebec law. You would select that guide, and again either read through the key resources or click the Legislative Research tab, where you'll find a list of relevant resources. Today we'll be looking once again at CanLII, in particular to look up current federal legislation, but know that you can consult other resources as well. We'll also look at LegisInfo for federal bills and links to debates. For Quebec law, we'll look in particular at the CAIJ's eLois collection, a collection of annotated laws. We won't have time to look at the website of the National Assembly, where you can find information about bills, but I will expect you to take a look at this on your own time as part of the assignment associated with this module. In general, it is quite similar to the LegisInfo website. And next semester, we'll look more closely at historical sources so that you could learn how to trace the history of a law. You might recall that last lesson, I told you that CanLII was a great place to start if you are looking for fairly recent case or legislation currently in force. Again, if you know exactly what you were looking for, you can type it into the second box that searches by name or citation. Let's look for the legislation we saw when we were just looking at citations. If I type in criminal code, you can see the full citation come up here, and I can click in to get the entire document. And we can go on with all the other documents I looked at. So here the Yukon legislation appears third because CanLII's results are ranked by popularity. And last, we have the Civil Code of Quebec, which is available in its entirety on CanLII, but is probably not the best way to read it. One thing to note about the legislation on CanLII, or any database these days, is that you're generally looking at a consolidated version of a statute. That is, you're looking at what the law looks like currently, with any amendments integrated within, as opposed to the law when it was enacted. This allows you to avoid being forced to look at multiple documents to piece together what the current version of the law looks like, something you will need to do when doing point-in-time research before acts were automatically consolidated online, and which we will see together in the winter semester. Now, you may have noticed that when you are looking at legislation, the tabs at the top differ from those that you see when you look for case law. Let's look through these briefly. First off, you have version history. Now, CanLII doesn't really go back that far in time, as you can see here, so I wouldn't recommend it for historical research when you're looking to trace back a law to its origins. But version history is useful when you want to compare a current version of a law and the law as it was a few years back. So I can see here that there was a change in 2018, and we can compare the current version and previous versions to see what changed by selecting the versions and clicking on the Compare button. You can use the arrows at the top of the comparison page to easily navigate changes, which are clearly highlighted in red for removed text and green for added text. The next tab is the Regulations tab. Regulations exist by virtue of statutes or acts. They cannot exist on their own. So when you are looking at an act, if the act enables the creation of regulation and the regulation has been promulgated, you will conveniently find it here. Conversely, if you are looking at a regulation, it will always lead you to the enabling statute. Sometimes, but not always, the act that amends the one you are looking at is included in CanLII. In other words, you have the law as enacted separate from the consolidated act. This would be found in the Amendments tab. And last, you have a Cited By feature that allows you to cite up or note up the legislation and see where the legislation has generally been cited. So let's get back to our paper on life imprisonment. As I reminded you earlier, last time we searched for cases using keywords, searching in the first CanLII box. In reality, however, the best way to find cases on the life imprisonment sentence is to cite up or note up the provision of the criminal code. That is, to see what cases refer to the provision that deals with the life imprisonment sentence. In other words, starting with legislation, as opposed to case law directly, is generally considered a stronger search strategy. Yet students often jump straight into case law, ignoring the fact that their research question was actually based in a legislative provision. Compare our search last module to this time, and you'll see why this method is that much more effective and easier. So this was a question about the life imprisonment sentence. Let's go back then to the criminal code. And section 745. Click on the section number, it's a hyperlink. And what do you see? Almost 370 citing documents. Now this is a list of documents citing to the specific section of the criminal code, as opposed to any section of the criminal code, which is the last general tab. Click again to see the breakdown of where it is cited. Cases, legislation, and commentary. This new search allows you to further refine. You wanted to find some cases where a sentence of life imprisonment was handed down to see what sorts of crimes led to that sentence. So there are 338 cases here. Now we're only interested in those cases where there was no eligibility of parole for 20 years. So let's add back in parole/S in the same sentence as 20 years and type that into the full text box to narrow the search results. Since we're already in section 745, we don't need to search life imprisonment. and I eliminated the word eligibility because it's pretty self-evident when we're already within the 745 context. And again, we can limit to cases heard on appeal. So that's a quick preview of CanLII. A couple of quick warnings about CanLII. First, the summaries published under CanLII Connects are historically written by law students, though recently there are a lot more produced by law firms, so just be careful. Also be aware of the gaps in CanLII's coverage. Double check the coverage by jurisdiction just to be sure about what is and what is not included in your searches. And you can see the last module for instructions on how to do that. Turning back to bills, the LibGuide tells us that LegisInfo is the place to go. Let's say you were interested in Bill C-13, the COVID-19 Emergency Response Act. Particularly, you wanted to know how it was passed and what the legislature's intent was. So you scroll down to C-13 and click on it. And what do we find? Details of how the bill made its way through the two chambers, with links to the Hansard. If it hadn't passed yet, you would see the status of the bill. You see a quick link to major speeches, recorded votes, and coming into force information, something we'll discuss more fully in the winter. You can also find a legislative summary written by a research team at the Library of Parliament, which breaks down the legislation for you, as well as further reading, which are recommended to help you understand party stances. It's often linked to press releases. In general, when searching LegisInfo, be careful to select the right parliament and session, or you might end up looking at the wrong bill. The CAIJ is the library of the Quebec Bar, and following the signing of that consent document during Integration Week, you are now all members of the CAIJ as if you were active members of the Quebec Bar, and you are actually the first class in the history of McGill to have this benefit from the start of your degree. While a lot of the content on the CAIJ website is free and open to the public, such as the topo tool we looked at in the first module, there is some content that is restricted to CAIJ members. For instance, a very highly coveted annotated civil code by Baudouin and Renaud. Annotated laws in general are a fantastic way to help you understand how legislation has been interpreted by the courts. The CAIJ offers two types of annotated laws. The first are homemade annotated laws, where they go article by article and scan the content in their database to find commentary and case law that reference each article. In other words, they are simply citing up each article of the Act. The other type of annotated law contains not only these in-house annotations, but also the electronic version of a published print annotated law. These are identifiable by the name alter ego at the end of the law, or the word annotations, suggesting more than one print text has been integrated. Outside of these electronic annotated laws, McGill does have some print annotated laws in our print collection. To give you an idea of what an annotation looks like, let's take a look at Article 1457 of the CCQ. Had you looked this up in CanLII, all you would get is the text itself from the CCQ. Here, you get annotations from two texts, Baudouin and Renaud's annotated CCQ and Karim's Les Obligations. And Karim's Les Obligations will only be available, evidently, for articles that cover the book on Obligation, Book 5. So here I would type in 1457. And if I want to access the annotated civil code, I would have to click on here and connect to my account. Click on the little plus signs to expand the annotation. You can see that 1457 is particularly extensive. At the very end, you have the option for the second annotated text, Les Obligations by Karim, as well as the in-house annotations. You'll also see the commentaries from the minister, which are explanations of legislative intent, links to related research questions and resources to help you get those answers, so from Topo, and links to the debates. And that's all for this lesson. Evidently, there are other databases you can use to search for legislation, and with time you will find your own preferences. Remember that we do offer training on particular databases throughout the year, so keep an eye open for those. Now please see the associated assignment for this lesson, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions.